Hey, I'm Scott.
And I'm Chris.
And this is Doxalogic, where we help you think with your Bible.
Well, welcome back to another episode of Doxalogic. And Scott, this is one where you and I are now looking to my right. We're not sitting across from each other. We're sitting next to each other. And if you are watching on YouTube, you're going to see why. That's because we have got a special guest and a new format of how we're looking at our guests, which is why we're side by side now. But Scott, go ahead and introduce today's special guest.
Yeah, for our podcast today, we have my brother on, Ryan Hollingshead, who actually,
Ryan Hollingshead.
Which, funnily enough, for those who go to Doxa Church, Ryan and his wife, then girlfriend, Sailor, were the first members of Doxa Church. So the first people that believed in that vision and gave up quite a bit to be a part of church planting with us. And Ryan, we're delighted to have you.
Yeah, thanks, guys. This is so fun. It's funny now coming back to Doxa. There's very few faces that I recognize, but it's fun being here with the three of us because I feel like I think Chris was the first hire. Is that right? First
pastor hired besides Scott. They were called part-time people
Yeah.
at the time. The first full-time hire. Yeah, that's right. That's
Got
right.
it.
And I got to know you guys just for that season, which we're going to get into that story and background. And Ryan, there's a couple levels of why this conversation will, I think, be neat for different reasons for different people. One is the historical background, personal and background of the church and your involvement in the church. It's worth celebrating God's goodness in that, but also just we're going to get into this too, your life as a professional soccer player in the MLS and now with the LAFC down in Southern California. And we're going to get into that as well. So living for the Lord in a very unique and, let's be honest, difficult environment to be living for God's glory in professional sports. And so we should start, though, probably from the beginning. And so give us everything about Scott's childhood. Your childhood. No, it doesn't have to just be about all that. But would love to actually start with some of that background, your growing up years and coming to faith in the Lord as we get started.
Yeah, should we just make this about a little dirt podcast?
Yeah. Scott is the oldest brother harassed.
We shouldn't make it so about bad. This is why I wrote questions out for Chris to ask, and he already is not asking the questions that are on the list.
Let's just go back to some good childhood stories, some made-up languages that we had as kids. Oh man. So maybe I'll take it in like a mini testimony. Is that helpful,
yeah, that's
Chris?
a great way to do it.
In a condensed version, we grew up in a home that was not entirely devoid of some faith or some connection to the Christian faith. My mom and dad would dabble in taking us to church in some rare moments, and we were kind of on again, off again. If we had a soccer game, it took precedence over going to church on a Sunday. But there wasn't there was not like a pushback against religion or anything like that. So we grew up kind of just like Christianity was there, maybe in the background is maybe the best way that I would say I felt it. And Scott was kind of the lead impetus into drawing our family into faith. And so Scott got saved in the beginning of high school. Would you say, Scott? Middle school?
Yeah, like middle school-ish.
Okay. And so Scott was the first person to share the gospel with me, give me my first Bible, talk to me about Jesus. And for a long time, it didn't equate. It didn't mean anything. The Bible went on my shelf. The conversations ended in a dead end. And in a cul-de-sac, I wasn't interested in Jesus, wasn't interested in my faith. And as I watched kind of Scott grow and through some family dynamics of parents getting divorced and dad leaving, Scott really as the oldest brother, took a role in my life and a role in my other brothers' lives as well, as almost this father figure. And some of that was really healthy. And Scott was such a gentleman and so brave to step into that role. And in some ways unhealthy that he was stepping into that role. And there was just some difficulty in that, where there's this void and who steps in. And so anyway, a lot of pressure was put on Scott, and in almost every way he stood up to that and handled that pressure and handled that weight on his shoulders. And I could cry talking about it, but that also comes in the story later into why I made a decision down the road that I did. But through just more conversations, talking with Scott, he was so serious about his faith. And it was the first time that I saw like the rubber meet the road when it came to Christianity. A person who believed the Bible, believed Jesus at his word, but then was actually living it out amongst friends and acquaintances that weren't living it out. And so that really caught my eye. He went off to college. I kind of went through middle school, went into high school. And there was this moment in like my junior year of high school that I felt the Lord just calling me to pick up the Bible that Scott had given me and to begin reading it. And in just encountering Jesus in the texts of, especially the Gospels, I got saved. The Lord just saved me. And so there was some fire that lit in me, this like turn from the desiring the sin that I was desiring to wanting to just follow Jesus, to wanting to pursue him. And then on top of that, that drew a even deeper relationship with Scott and I, as we got to talk about the deepest of things, talk about our faith, talk about our relationship with Jesus, talk about our pursuit of him in college and in difficult seasons and in all of these things. And so in part of that conversation and part of me being saved and having these conversations with Scott, a lot of times too, I would just pick up the phone and call Scott. I'm like, Scott, what does John Piper mean when he says God has two wills? What does that mean? Like explain it to me. And Scott's like, hey, this is it. He break it down, A, B, C, D. And I'm like, why didn't he say it like that? It's perfect, And so there was just this relationship and this friendship building out between Scott and I, where he was in so many ways already showing his calling to being a pastor and answering those questions for me and my siblings and our family. And then for me, developing just even this greater love for Scott that was not only did he step up for our family in such a big way, but also for me in my spiritual life was such a solid just rock that I could go to with questions and ask about what he's learning, what God's teaching him, what books should I get into, what's a way that I should, answering questions, those sorts of things. And so that was my background. That's how I came to faith. That's how Scott and I's relationship really grew too. And then that leads into what happened with Doxa and that whole story. So I don't know if you want to...
Yeah, Ryan, let's go there. Let's get to so in the background, all that's happening, and that's kind of like I would say like tier 1 stuff, right? The Lord is working you over. You're coming to faith. You're growing in your relationship with the Lord, but the Lord had gifted you in particular with a pretty tremendous gift as a soccer player, and you saw that playing out. I saw it playing out. The joke, of course, was that I was the one that was the guy who tries hard, and you were the guy that was just naturally skilled. And
he says with no jealousy whatsoever.
Well, I'd like to say that you played against older brothers for most of your life, so that helped you in some way.
Had to have.
As others have tried to take credit for your success that you've had. But why don't you just give us a little background into your soccer career, and get us to like this decision point that happened at the end of your time at UCLA.
Yeah, so growing up soccer-wise, we were always a soccer family, and I don't know what started that or why we kind of put all of our eggs in that basket. We dabbled with some basketball or some baseball at some point, but really quickly, we just became a soccer family, and mom, dad, they never played soccer. I don't know why that was our thing, but we just played soccer. So from a very early age, dad's coaching your teams or Kyle's teams, my other older brother, and I would go with you to practice. And it was like, I either sat on the sideline and watched y'all practice, or I learned how to play with the bigger kids and join in and practice with y'all. And so I from an early age, learned how to find skills or figure out ways that I could compete with kids that were older, stronger, bigger than me, because that was way more fun than just sitting on the grass on the sideline and watching you guys play or you guys practice. So wanting to just be a part of it with you guys. And I was always good for my age because of that. So I was used to playing with older kids. When I would go down and play with my aged kids, I was always one of the better players, even from a very young age. But I was never like an all-star. And there's all these systems and rankings in youth soccer, and there's ODP and youth national team. There's all these things. I was never a part of any of those and never competing at the highest of highest levels. And so although I was a really good player, I was playing for a small club, in Loomis, California, and we were not going to the biggest tournaments or being in places where you could really get scouted. So in trying to pursue getting a college scholarship to go play soccer in college, it was a lot of me blast emailing tons of colleges and tons of coaches to say, hey, I think I'm good enough. Give me a chance to play. And so partly I got some interest from a couple schools. It came down to I had interest from about 2 schools that I was considering, University of Washington and one other school. And in that process, Scott had, while I'm in college or in high school, kind of pursuing college, Scott had walked himself on to the UCLA men's soccer team, which is absolutely unheard of. Hasn't happened since. I don't know if it happened before. There's like recruited walk-ons, where you come into the school knowing you're going to have a spot on the team. You just don't have a scholarship. That's one thing, totally different. Scott had just got into UCLA, taken 2 years of not playing, and then after 2 years was like, hey, I think I can play, and I'm going to try. So he just showed up at the coach's door and, knocked on the door, said, I want to play. And the coach was like, nah, we're good. We have enough players. And he's like, just let me come out. Let me practice. And Scott, in his persistence, after months and months and years, earned himself a spot on the team, got good playing time, got himself like a good solid role on the team. And it's actually hilarious that the way that my whole career started was in Scott's basically exit interview or exit physical, when Scott was saying, hey, should I come back for one more year or should I just be done? The conversation went a certain way. Scott's like, okay, I'm done. I'm going to move on. I'm going to go into ministry. He ended up going to Mexico City. And on his way out was like, hey, and also part of the reason you guys haven't won a championship in a long time is because you're recruiting guys like this that don't care, when you should be recruiting guys like my brother that would knock the socks off these other guys and also would give his whole heart to the program type of thing. And I literally, from that exit interview of Scott, get a call from the head coach of UCLA soccer a week later, without ever watching me play a lick of soccer, offers me a scholarship to go play at UCLA, only based on the word of Scott walking out of his office. So that got me to UCLA, and then from there things took off. And so there wasn't 0 options. I had other colleges, other D1 options I was looking at, but UCLA was by far the cream of the crop, the school I wanted to go to, one of the best soccer schools in the nation. And it was simply Scott's persistence to get on the team and then his word walking out that got me a scholarship to go play at UCLA.
Yeah, and you make it sound so positive, Ryan, but I was actually just upset about the situation. And I was basically like, you're doing such a bad job recruiting guys. The caliber and care of character in these guys is not where it should be to have that kind of resilience and grit that you need to win a championship. And that's the problem here. I was upset. And I said, and that's why you'd never recruit my brother, kind of thing. And that's what started it. So I as positive as you are about it, I don't think I was quite the saint in that process, but the Lord used it, and then you had to do your thing. You had to go out and play. And the long story short is you did. I remember the first game you ever played was against the former national champion of the year before. You were playing away at Maryland. Somehow you got into that game. I don't know how. And I remember you couldn't watch the game back then, so we were watching it on Gamecaster or whatever that was called. And you get in, and I was so nervous because I had talked such a big game. I'm like, if my brother tanks right now, this is going to be so embarrassing. And somehow the game ends with you scoring, right? Was it the winning goal? And you guys won 2-1 off your goal, and that basically set your career up. So you had to earn it, such that by the time you were done in college, you were an All-American, and you were getting serious interest from professional teams for a first round draft pick into the MLS. And that is where our story kind of comes together in terms of our church and everything. I was going to plant a church, and you were wrestling with your opportunity to play professional soccer in the MLS. So walk us through that. What happened? Tell us. I know 1 Samuel 14 was big in that assessment. Give us some of the details on the truly kind of surprising decision that you made in that season.
Yeah. So first off, whenever you ask anybody what you should do, should you help your brother plant a church, or should you go play professional sports, professional soccer? It is 100% unanimous. Nobody wants you to go plant the church. so I'm coming out of
You're
college.
saying that's not people's advice to you.
Yeah.
That was all of the advice to me.
Okay, fair.
So
yeah.
So finishing up my 4th year in college, I'm coming out of the draft, or coming out and getting into the draft at the exact same time, Scott, that you're planting this church. And so you have a phone call with me, and you're like, okay, we know the spot. It's Sacramento. God's calling us to Sacramento. We're coming back in February. We're planting. And I'm like, oh, February. Okay. Yeah. That's exactly when the draft is in the MLS. And that's exactly when the season starts. And for a while, it was like, okay, you didn't know what God was doing. You didn't know the exact timeline. And then it became very clear. And it was like, hey, it's happening. And this was after, years of us talking about church planting, feeling your call to church planting, watching God grow that call, watching you be faithful to go to Chicago for this church planting network, and then to be sent back out to Sacramento. All of that had happened while I was finishing up my last season in college playing soccer. Had, a really good season, was Pac-12 Player of the Year, which is usually like a top 3 pick in the draft. If you get that kind of title, you're thinking you'll go really early in the first round. And so it was this question of like, okay, do I go play soccer or do I help Scott? So I asked everybody, and the only person that pushed back on definitely go play professional sports was Taylor, my girlfriend's, who then became a fiance, then became a wife, but girlfriend at the time. And she's like, I don't know. I don't think it's that simple. And I think, Scott, you also had a feeling, but you were trying so hard to not sway me. Mm-hmm. You didn't want me coming to Harvest to be like, I pleaded with you, please. It was just kind of like, hey, if God does it, he does it. And if he doesn't, then I trust him and we're going a different route, Mm-hmm. So, there was very few people, though, that had this like understanding of you and an understanding of what God was doing with you over the last 4 or 5 years, preparing you for this calling, that I think added a different weight to what church planting meant in this moment, rather than just like, oh, it's a random church plant. And like, you can always go be a church planter or be on staff at a church. Just do it after you play soccer. So anyway, all that to say, nobody said that I should go plant the church with Scott. Everybody said go pro, but I just felt like the Lord was doing something different. And it was me. I'm reading in the Old Testament this story about, and I'm going to butcher this now, so you're going to have to help me with this, Scott. This story in 1 Samuel where Jonathan and his armor bearer are, the whole army has like, they're afraid to attack, or they're afraid to get into battle. And Jonathan and his armor bearer, in this moment of just like faith in what God is doing, they walk into the camp of the Philistines and they're ready to just trust God at his word. And they're like, okay, God, if you give us this sign, we'll know you're handing them over. And if you give us this sign, we'll know you're not handing them over, and we'll get out of here. But basically the whole army's afraid to attack the Philistines. These two guys by themselves go in. God gives them over, puts them into their hand, and the Philistine army starts retreating. And Jonathan and his armor bearer are just like pursuing them as this army retreats. And then, of course, as soon as they see the Philistines retreat, the whole army comes out of like hiding in the caves and hiding in the rocks. And they're so afraid of this army until they see them retreating because of the strength of God through Jonathan and his armor bearer. And then they all come running. And there was just this moment of clarity in reading this story where it was like, I don't want to be the guy hiding behind the rocks, waiting for Doxa to be up and running with 1,000 members. And then I'm like, okay, yeah, now I'm in. When everything's easy, the other army's fleeing and the work's already been done. And so that's not, Scott and I had this conversation because I was like, Scott, you got to preach this passage. He's like, I don't think that's exactly what the passage means. So the Lord used this passage to bring out in me, I think, a desire that he was already putting on my heart, which is join your brother. And he used this passage to kind of solidify that. And it was just this moment of like, while everybody else is hiding and in the caves and they're in the rocks, then two guys go forward with this faith and it changes everything. And I was like, I'm going to be on the front lines with Scott when everything's hard, when nobody trusts it, when we're renting out the space at a little bakery, when we're free spacing in the back of a grocery store, when nobody cares, when the church isn't cool, when nobody wants to be there, when you're barely getting your own family convinced to show up on a Sunday.
Barely.
I'm in.
That's good.
I'm in. And so it was special, man. The Lord was so gracious to give me this confirmation in that way. That from that moment forward, we said yes to Sacramento. We said no to the draft, and we really didn't look back.
If I could just summarize and keep the plot line moving forward here, that last bit there, you had calls coming to you from teams, and you began to just tell them what your plans were, right? I'm not playing next year at least, basically, right? You can still draft me. I'm not playing next year, and that turned into a mid-round draft pick. Maybe briefly just sort of get through that, and then we'll kind of get to the experience of how you ended up returning to the MLS as well.
Yeah. So as soon as I set my foot down, we're going with Harvest at the time. We're going with Doxa. We say yes to that. So I start saying no to all the coaches calling, saying they want to draft me. So the way that this works is teams start calling you saying, hey, you're on our short list. Would you see yourself playing in Seattle or Kansas City? Or, they're checking to see kind of what your interest is. Should they spend a draft pick on you? They want to know more about your story, your background, all that stuff. So coaches are calling me saying, hey, we think you're a top 3 pick. Are you interested in coming to this city? And I'm like, hey, don't draft me. I'm not coming. I'm going to take my name out of the draft, and I'm going to help my brother plant a church in Sacramento, so don't draft me. One of those phone calls was from Ziggy Schmidt. He's the coach of the Seattle Sounders, ex-coach of UCLA Bruins. So we had a relationship, and he called me and was like, hey, don't take your name out of the draft. Just leave it in the draft. I'll draft you at the very end in the supplemental rounds of the draft. And that way, if anything changes or something happens and you want to come play, we'll have your rights in Seattle and you can come play for us. And so I was like, okay, that's not too crazy. You're not wasting a pick on me. You understand the situation. That's just like, if, we never know what's going to happen. Sure. We'll leave my name in the draft and we'll come to Seattle in the supplemental rounds, whatever. Well, the problem was not every coach called me. So of the, 20 coaches in the league, I got calls from maybe 10 to 12 of them. And then there's 8 to 10 that don't call me, and I'm not going to pick up the phone and call them and say, hey, in case you're interested, don't draft me. But I'm thinking the coaches all talk. They'll all hear around the league, don't draft Ryan. They'll see me slipping down the rankings or whatever. Don't draft Ryan. He's not coming to play. So it turns out in that confusion, FC Dallas drafted me knowing and hearing that I wasn't going to come play, but thinking there was a chance that I would return at some point. So they drafted me a lot earlier than the supplemental rounds. They drafted me in the early second round.
No, I think it was first. You were like teens in the first round.
Okay, or late first round.
And
okay,
I think it was to retain your rights, right? That was the idea. Is
yes.
if they draft you, even if they decide it was a better pick to draft you, even if you never played, because on the off chance you came back, you were theirs essentially if you wanted to play in the league.
Yes, if I ever wanted to come play, I had to go to Dallas. Yes, yep. So that's how it happened. So I got drafted. I was actually in Haiti at the time with my wife at an orphanage. So when I got back into the States, I turned my phone on and just had hundreds of missed calls and hundreds of text messages from Dallas saying like, hey, we drafted you. Where are you? Give us a call back. And so that first conversation was extremely awkward, telling them, why
Yeah.
did you draft me? I'm not coming. What were you thinking? And they're like, well, we just took a chance and, we thought maybe you were too competitive to say no to a early round draft pick. And I was like, well, I'm saying no.
So for the record, it was the second round. I
was
just did
it?
a little historical
Okay, great.
research, and
There it is.
it was second round.
Ryan should know better than me anyway.
The matter is settled. So
Perfect. What pick in the second round?
It actually just said second round. It didn't even say. I had two websites. Neither said the number.
Yeah.
So you can go find out, Ryan, if you care that much to find out.
Clearly,
right?
he doesn't.
I'm going to stop my research there. So what an incredible time that was. And again, kind of plotline moving forward. You and Taylor, girlfriend and fiance, and you're getting ready for life together, and you both come to join the church. And that was that season, exactly like you said, of like bouncing around different locations. What is commonly called the core group phase of the church. So for people listening, that's February of 2013 until October of 2013. The first Sunday of October was the first Sunday morning service launched at Granite Bay High School under the name Harvest Bible Chapel Sacramento, our former name before we became Doxa in 2019. But so we celebrate the anniversary on the first Sunday of October. But the work was being done, and you were there, Ryan, for that. And I can remember some stories Scott shared about those back of the Rayleighs. This is the Rayleighs on Auburn, Folsom, and Douglas, right? You're lugging equipment, two big old duffel, cases, and there's 15 to whatever 20, whatever people are coming, and you're giving the vision, Scott, and then like everyone's gone, and you're coming back out, and Ryan's just like full of enthusiasm. Did you see that?
Yeah,
that was what God is doing, and Scott's like,
see what?
See what? So just a brief moment on like your, or even Scott, his, Ryan's just support, right? And how important that was by faith. Ryan seeing so much more than what met the eye, maybe.
Yeah. You want to go?
So yeah, I would love to jump into that. It's so easy when you're not the one casting the vision, right? You're not the one on salary. You're not the one where it's like, hey, this either like makes it or breaks it because of what God's going to do through me in this moment. And that was the weight and the pressure that Scott had on him. And I had zero of that pressure. I was working as a leasing agent at a random office to try to pay the bills, sleeping on Scott's couch while my girlfriend at the time, now wife, was sleeping at my mom's house. And we were just like doing whatever we could to just pay the bills and help support the church in any way we could. And so for me, it was this special moment of like, hey, I'm not tied to this in any way, but I get to see God working out the calling that he's put on Scott's life to be a pastor, which I've known for, 10 years, but for sure for the last 5 years, it's been clear as day. He's been pursuing it. God's been calling him to it. And now I'm watching this play out in real life. So in my mind, I'm like, this is epic, Scott. Like, you're doing it. You're doing it. We're doing it. This is happening. And it was so funny because there'd be moments where, there's 10 people in seats at these vision meetings and 8 of them have the last name Hollingshead and 2 of them are just looking for the bathroom. They walked into the wrong room, And then there'd be other meetings where 30 people would show up and you had like no idea who they were. And they were like, I love Harvest. We've been praying for a Harvest church to come out here. It's here. We couldn't be more excited or more connected. And they're just like ready to dive in. And you're like, this is amazing. And then the next week, nobody's there again. And so you just had these ups and downs. But for me, I think the steadiness of it was I could just see what God was doing in Scott. And I was so pumped for that I was like, I don't care if more people are coming or less people are coming. Like, you're doing it and God's behind this and he's moving and it's happening. Like, this is happening. And either way, we're praying for God to move because he's going to build his church and we can't build his church and we can't manufacture the church. And so we have to just trust in what he's doing. And so I got to play a really fun role. And I think, like you said, Chris, too, there was just this faith that I had in what God was doing through Scott that I was like, no, I'm convinced we are going to see this take off. And sure enough, the Lord has been so faithful.
Yeah, I think you seeing with the eye of faith is a blessing on a level that the church should be really grateful for, and certainly I am. As much as it's by faith that you go out and do something like church plant with no core group, 18 people were like, yeah, that sounds great. And then when we got on the field, it got back to Sacramento, they're like, oh, you're really coming back to plant a church? On the second thoughts, no thanks. And so that 18 that I thought was going to be the strong core of adults turned into being you and your wife. And of course, I was so young at that point, and you were 5 years younger than me. Not a great start. And so it was difficult at times to walk by faith so blindly, but to have your reassurance of like, did you see what God did in that time? And I was like, help me. No, I didn't see what God was doing in that time. And so you're battling a lot of that, but the encouragement was huge. And so, so that was just a massive gift, and it was something that ultimately the Lord supplied, right? And so we kept going by faith, and we get to that launch in October, and then the Lord starts doing something in you, right? There's some things you were seeing in the church, and there were some things that was happening in your heart towards the future that had you thinking now about eventually re-entering into the MLS. And so maybe give a little bit of that, and then we'll talk about your career and all that.
Yeah. So God was building the core group. It was steadily just kind of growing, and then it got to this point where Scott, we had that conversation of like, man, we've got the funds, like we've got the people, the group is here, we can officially launch. And so we set that date in October, and everything is going so smoothly. And then the next conversation was like, hey, we've also got the funds to hire somebody on staff to do. And at this point, we'd spread out more of the jobs across different people who had kind of committed. But for a while, it was like I was set up teardown, and I was like music at that point was plugging an iPod into the speakers. So
the iPod, I love that. Remember that, folks?
Oh,
yes.
It was.
With the circle dial, with the circular dial.
Yeah, that's right.
And then, so that next conversation was, hey, we've got the funds to bring somebody else on staff to do all the things you're doing, small groups, set up, tear down, welcome team, that sort of stuff. And we can kind of, that person can be you. And then we can have the two people on staff, both with the last name Hollingshead, which is a little cultish, or it could be somebody else. And if it's somebody else, that could free you up to go, pursue soccer. And throughout this year that we're building the core group and that I'm helping Scott, the FC Dallas is calling me about every month, checking in, saying, hey, are you ready to come play? How's your family? How's the church? Are you ready to come play? How's the family? How's the church? Are you ready to come play? And I'm always like, no, family's good, church is good, no. Family's good, church is good, no. And for a while, I'm thinking they're just going to give up, like they're not just going to wait on this for forever. And I was just committed to never playing soccer again. I thought that this is what the Lord was doing. And in that conversation in October, Scott, it was the first time that I was like, oh, maybe there is a way that I go play soccer. And mind you, I hadn't played a game in 8-9 months. Maybe Scott and I played a random pickup game here or there just to have fun with some buddies. We'd play some pickup basketball, but I'm not really working out, definitely not working out at like a professional sport level. And so it was that conversation of, hey, this could free you up to go play. And we all, Taylor, me, Scott, Aaron, had conversations about it for a long time and felt like this is what the Lord was doing. And part of it was some financial decisions to help pay off some student loans. Part of it was not wanting to be only Hollingsheads on staff at the church. And then part of it was just like trusting what God was doing. And then, and Chris, I forget the timeline of when you were in that too, but it was around that time. And Scott, I don't know if you have more clarity on your side with that conversation, but it just felt like everything was coming together for that to happen. And I think I went into it not expecting to ever play soccer again. And it just became this opportunity. I was like, I think this is the best move. I think it is better for you to hire somebody else. And I think it is better for me to try to go play for a little bit. And then that's what God was doing.
Yeah. And I think about like the way steps of faith work, it's all so invisible, also unknown. And you don't know what you're committing to, both in what's going to like outcome, but also in time. like, how long is this commitment going to be? You just go in going, I just trust the Lord, right? And then
Yeah.
you're getting a sense for how things play out providentially, and you're seeking the Lord in prayer, and you have good counsel around you to begin to realize that thing that the Lord had established me for, that role was naturally kind of coming to an end in a freeing way, to be kind of released in a sense to go and pursue whatever the Lord had next for you. And it was just it was honorable, and it was done well with the church in mind, but also just your future in mind, and probably a little bit of a spark still in you to play soccer. And I think that's sort of the direction it went. And what's cool about that is you brought your Christian faith with you into the world of professional sports, which is probably an interesting world, and one that would be fun to kind of, get a little insight into. And so to give a background, and I want you to speak into this, you go back to Dallas and you begin to work, most people have what, on average, a 2.5 year career or something like that. Is that somewhere in that realm, 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, I think
I,
that's about the average,
okay.
that 2 to 3 year average.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like I think I've heard that before. And you've carved out a 10+ year career for yourself and seen more probably happen than you ever thought was going to happen. And so, how did you enter into that world, and with your Christian faith, wearing that on your sleeve in a sense, and dealing with some of the pressures of performance and wrestling with how does my Christianity inform the way that I carry myself, the way that I, engage with the different responsibilities of being a professional athlete, when some of that's challenging, right? They're pressing some certain ideologies onto you. They're requiring you to wear certain things. I mean, kind of walk us through that. So you get out into the professional soccer world and help frame it with like how your Christianity kind of played into that.
Yeah, it's so hard because when I first got into the league, there wasn't much of it. And then since I've been in the league, there have been initiative after initiative kind of forced upon players to stand up for political agendas or cultural agendas. And it's really not like an optional choice for players. And so that kind of evolved from when I first got in the league. But the big thing for me was I was going into a soccer career that I really had kind of written off as not going to be a possibility. And so it was almost like I was on borrowed time. Like I got to go pursue soccer and pursue professional sports with this mentality of like, I know this isn't the end all be all. Like I know this isn't where it's all at. I just said no to this to do the most dirty job of church planting, and just was like filled with joy for a year, like in the trenches for a year, filled with more joy than I could have imagined. And so I think I had a very real experience of I'm never going to be the person that thinks too highly of this career or this occupation. So that's a good thing and a bad thing. Part of me, or part of some of my coaches, I think, would say like, hey, Ryan, I need you to care a little bit more, or I need you to take this a little more seriously. But I always had the mindset of, I love playing soccer. I love this sport. It's so fun that I get to go to work every day and play a game, is my work. That's so special. But also if it ends tomorrow, I would walk away and I would be just equally as joyful, equally as happy. And so I think having that mindset was helpful, especially in getting started and trying to get back into the sport, because I was slow, I was weak, I had lost so much of my step in not playing soccer for a year that it took me a long time to get back to not only like collegiate soccer level, but then to go one step further into professional soccer level. It took a really long time to get there. And had I been too serious with myself or thought too deeply about mistakes I was making in training or the way my body was feeling, I could have given up easily. But I just was trusting like, hey, I get to enjoy this. And as long as it goes, it goes. And I got better and I got stronger and I got faster and I understood the game a little bit more. And so that was special. And then the other side of that is like, as a believer, and this is true of anybody in any occupation, is you never check your faith at the door. You're never walking onto the field saying, okay, I'm no longer a Christian. I'm just going to go compete. And then once I'm done competing, I'll get off the field and then be a Christian again. And so a lot of what that looked like for me was like just working out the simplicity of the Christian life in an environment where nobody really cares, you know? So if I made a bad tackle in practice or got so angry in practice that I'm cussing or saying something, I would at the end of practice bring the whole group together and say like, hey guys, I need to talk for a second. And I would repent in front of the group and I'd say, hey, I need to say sorry because I said this word or I was late on this tackle on purpose. And that's not okay. I hold myself to a higher standard. And I just want you to hear that from me that I'm saying sorry for that, and I want you all to hold me accountable to that next time, you know? And everybody on the field is like, what are you talking about? We do that every day. What are you apologizing for? And it was like these little ways though that I could work out my Christian faith in real life. And what that looks like was was just talking to teammates about Jesus and sharing the gospel whenever I could and continuing to still do that. And so yeah, there's no special like, okay, you're an athlete. What does your Christianity look like? It's like, no, I'm a Christian and I just happen to also be an athlete. And so my life looks very similar as if I was a Christian working in a cubicle, you know, like it's going to be Jesus centered and it's going to be Bible focused. And there's going to be a lot of good days, a lot of bad days, and a lot of, in betweens.
And yet there is an added public scrutiny, right? So the same faith, same equal faith as the person who is in a cubicle who works said job that has no public, spotlight maybe. But you do have a decent measure of public spotlights. You've been on a championship team, been an all-star, you've been playing for 10 years. And so just a little bit of the angle of maybe how you've developed more I don't know if courage is the word or firm resolution to even quietly just to say not going to do, even if the vast majority of the league or my team is going to accept something, right? A certain month or a certain expectation around what's on, the jersey and all that. Like, how have you processed through that? Because there is a courage that is needed and it can be applied in any job. And I would just say you've got a platform there that it has been cool to see the Lord working through.
Yeah, there's two things. The first thing is it's tough as an athlete because they force these things upon you, but they give you no real ability to speak on it. And so it's like, hey, wear this jersey. But you're like, wait, if I wear the jersey or if I don't wear the jersey, you're not going to let me explain myself. You're not going to give me like the floor so that I can go out and say like, hey, here's why I'm wearing it. Here's why I'm not wearing it. It's like you either walk out on that field and you have the jersey on or you don't have the jersey on. And depending on which of those things is true, everybody is going to judge which side of the fence you're on or what your stance is or whatever without you being able to say anything about your heart towards people or your belief in Jesus or any of that stuff. And so you're from square one, you're fighting a losing battle, which is like, no matter what I do here, I don't get the ability to really explain the fullness of it.
And Ryan, just to be clear, you're talking about like numbers that have the flag colors and certain kind of political ideological associations that they're wanting to put on a jersey or on a trainer's top or something like that.
Yeah,
Okay.
so a specific example is like in Pride Month, there is a warm-up jersey that is a celebration of Pride Month and of our Pride fans, Pride constituents, and we wear that before each game in that month. Is it June? Is that month?
Yeah.
I forget which month it is, but
it's
in
June.
that month
It's June,
we
the
wear
whole
it
month.
for.
Some would say it's the whole year, but I digress. Yes, it's June.
Yeah. So for me, it's so when it first happened, my stance was, well, I don't think I had a stance. When it first happened, I was like, okay, here's the warm up top, and I put it on, I run out and I warm up, and then I come back in, and then people are starting to talk about what the warm up even means and what the top means. I'm like, oh, that's what it means. Like, okay, I gotta now I need to come up with a theology. I have to come up with like a belief, and then what is that belief going to lead me to doing in this time? So at first it sneaks up on you, and then you're like, okay, I need to know what I believe and why I'm going to make a stance. And so then it became, for me, it was simple just to wear a different shirt. And so I wore a shirt that wasn't this warm-up top, But I wasn't super vocal about it. I wasn't like trying to make a scene out of it. I was just quietly not wearing the top, wearing my own top, and nobody was asking me about it. And so that was, for me, best case scenario. I was not trying to cause a scene. I was just trying to say, hey, I'm not celebrating something that God doesn't celebrate. And so I'm not putting this on as like this big hurrah to warm up in this way. Um, so the good thing is, haven't had a ton of conversations about that, but they are pressing that on you, and they are trying to not give you an option of whether you wear or don't wear. But it's hard to differentiate that just by simply wearing or not wearing. So by not wearing, I'm also likewise not saying, hey, we don't love you. We don't love that you're coming to watch our soccer game. I'm like, everybody is welcome here. I don't care at all what your background is. Come watch our soccer team play soccer. But if you're asking me to celebrate a lifestyle that is, because in the same way, I'm like, we're not celebrating all sorts of peoples from all sorts of, we've very selectively chosen 1 or 2 months that we really promote, and we're not promoting all the other ones. And so I want to say like, hey, anybody's welcome here. But again, there's none of that, like, there's no caveats. There's none of that, like, being able to tease it out. You're either yes, wearing the shirt, or no, not wearing the shirt. So, and all that, it's difficult. It's so hard as an athlete to make a stance, but I have been clear. I think my go-to line, and I've said it here before, is I cannot celebrate something that God doesn't celebrate. And so if you're asking me to do that, I will abstain, and I'll wear a different jersey.
Yeah, that's helpful. And just a simple way of approaching that's theological, but accessible. And that's really helpful. You had quite the scare. Now I'm forgetting, Ryan, how many years into your career, but to kind of shift focuses for a second. You were hit by a car on the freeway. That's probably the simplest way to say that. And when I mean hit by a car, I mean you, not in a car, hit by a car. Physically, your person. Because a lot of times when I say you got hit by a car on the freeway, people go, oh man.
He got bumped into.
He got bumped into really bad. And I'm like, yeah, but like his body to a windshield kind of thing. And so that obviously was quite the story. Give us a little bit of that. It's kind of, we'll maybe take that and kind of meander towards a conclusion here. But I do think that obviously changed your life in some ways, but it was another expression of how you were able to leverage that for the glory of Christ.
Yeah, so it was January of 2017.
Okay.
And I was driving, actually, it was an ice storm in Dallas, and I was driving to pick up a friend who had gotten a little car accident, and his car was stranded, and he needed to get picked up to get brought back home. And so Taylor and I jumped in the car. We went to go pick him up, and on our way to pick him up, the car in front of us got into an accident, slammed into the median in the middle of the road, and they were in trouble. So I pulled over to the side of the road to get out, to go help them get out of the car. And to just make a long story short, I parked the car on the side of the road, in the shoulder, off the road, run up the street. So I'm on my feet.
And by street, you mean freeway, right?
Freeway. Yeah. 5-lane freeway. Yeah. And I'm in the median, so the middle of the road. So I'm not on the right, by the right shoulder, by the slow lane. I'm in the shoulder of the fast lane, because that's where the accident was, and that's where this guy was. And his car, when he had crashed, it knocked out the headlights, and so his car was just pitch dark in the middle of a dark night, and there weren't very many cars on the road. So by the time you come up and you see his car sitting perpendicular in the fast lane with him in the driver's seat facing straight at the cars that are coming towards him, they wouldn't see him till it was too late, and it's icy, so they would just slide and hit right into him. So I get out, run up the street as fast as I can. Again, there's not very many cars on the road because it's a really icy night, so people are staying off the road. I get him out of the car. We're standing now in the shoulder, out of the traffic, out of the lanes of the freeway, in the shoulder, in the middle of the road. And I'm like, hey, is everything okay? Do I need to call an ambulance? He had gotten out and walked with me, so I was like, okay, I think you're fine. But, how are you feeling? And as we're having this conversation, a car coming through the fast lane sees his car stopped in the fast lane, and at the last minute tries to dodge it by steering into the shoulder where I'm standing and hits me in my body and just shoots me down the freeway. And so there was a moment where I'm just laying in the middle of the fast lane after getting hit, and I'm not able to move. No part of my body is working. And so I think for a second I'm paralyzed, but after about 30 seconds ish, I start getting feeling back in my hands and my arms, and I get up and I can kind of hobble walk. It feels like both of my arms are broken. It turns out I broke my neck in 3 places. Had to get, casted up where you're just stationary with a neck break. You just can't do anything. You just lie in bed with a neck brace on and all these different things holding your head in place, and you just sit there for weeks on end. So it was the craziest injury. But after breaking my neck, had a full recovery, got back to playing, obviously, as I'm playing now. And it was another just testament to God's miraculous grace that I didn't have some crazier injury. Even thinking about breaking my neck, I broke my neck in a way that didn't require surgery, which is also unheard of.
Yeah.
Whenever you break your neck, it's fusion. And when it's fusion, they fuse your vertebrae together, and you lose all the mobility in each of those individual vertebrae that are fused together. So, as a soccer player, having to turn and check and do all that would become almost impossible. And the fact that I broke my neck but didn't have to have any surgery, and the neck healed back on its own, it was and 3 different vertebrae broke in all of the same way. My doctors were just dumbfounded by that stat. And so I was able to return fully to play, have had, how long has it been? 7 years of a career since then, and still feel great to this day. So praise God. But yeah, what a crazy. And again, I was just trying to help, I was trying to I felt like what was in front of me was this man needed help. And in the moment, it felt like the right thing to do to go get him out of the car.
Wild. Still crazy.
Yeah. Man, so much, Ryan, that we've covered, from literally, your guys' upbringing together to your coming to faith to the college sports world, the church planting. There's so much to, I'm sure in many ways we've just scratched the surface of some of this, but I'm wondering, as we get ready to close here, such a great conversation, what would you say to just our listeners about where you are now? You're in your early 30s, but late in your soccer career, right? You're getting ready to, I'm sure, thinking about what the next stage is and all of that. What would you say to someone who just is younger, right? They're, I don't know, half your age. They're a teenager still, right? And they're they're wanting to excel in sports or profession or something, and you're wanting to almost like your own 17-year-old self, 16-year-old self. What would you say as a bit of advice? You look back and say, here's why living for Christ, no matter what comes your way, needs to be preeminent over career, over success.
Yeah, I would say 2 things. The first thing is, one of the most joyful years of my life was 2013, where in every regard I was not making it. I was sleeping on Scott's couch. I was working a job for $15 an hour, barely paying the bills, but helping plant this church that I felt like God had called us to start. And it was just this year of immense joy, even in the midst of uncertainty, not knowing what God was going to do, not knowing how the church was going to be. And so when people try to hold things up and say well, professional athlete, how good of a life is that? And you're it's just not how it works, especially as a believer. It's not how it works. And if you choose Jesus over everything, it's always the right choice. So that's the first thing. The second thing is sports specific. What I tell anybody who asks about advice on getting to the next level, trying to become a professional athlete, is you just have to love it. I've seen so many people that want the next drill, or what's the next shooting regiment, how should I hit the ball perfectly. I'm all of that just matters. It's all nonsense. It doesn't matter at all unless you love playing the game so much that when everybody else stops playing, you just keep going, because there's always somebody out there that's training a little bit harder than you. But if you love the game, then when you're at home, you have the ball with you. When you go to your siblings' basketball game, you're kind of there with your soccer ball, juggling it or whatever. And so it's all about that desire and love. And I know Scott and I have both seen this, but I grew up with so many guys with tons of talent and parents who pushed them harder than anybody else and gave them all of the things they needed to get to the highest level. And the kids burn out by high school, if not college for sure. And they're so over the sport, they're so over playing because they've just dedicated their life to something that they weren't really behind. And so my advice is, if you love it, that'll be the impetus, that'll be the thing that kind of catapults you to becoming the best. And so I would focus on that, focus on just really enjoying the game, playing it because you love it. So those are two good thoughts, but again, you can't really separate your faith from what you do. And so, yeah, Jesus being first is always the right answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's good. Yeah. In Christ is who you are, and what you do right now is play soccer. And in the days to come, really, it's fill in the blank with whatever it is you're going to be doing, and that you will be doing to the glory of God.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. 100%.
Well, Ryan, appreciate your time, brother. Very, very thankful for this. We've been looking forward to being able to do this for some time. I'm sure it's going to really bless just our people, get a chance to listen to this. And thank you for just the impact that you've had, honestly, in our church, in our church's history, that now feels so long ago that it's easy until you listen to this. And people that have been around, even they've been around here 5, 6, 7 years, did not realize that all the way back toward the beginning, you had such an investment, and by faith, making the calls that you did, the Lord has blessed that, not only in your own life as you've continued to walk by faith in your career, but even here, there's a legacy to that, brother, and we're very, very grateful.
Well, I love you guys. Yeah, thanks for having me on. I was hoping we were going to get to some more.
Nope.
More stories.
I know where you're going.
That's part 2, and Scott's not going to be here for that, Ryan. Yeah. That's a one-on-one.
That'll be a special episode with just Pastor Chris.
Exactly.
Well, thanks, brother.
Note after note here on childhood stories, so I guess we'll just save it for next one.
Oh, that's awesome.
All right, man. Well, we look forward to. We look forward to seeing you soon, though, Ryan, when you're here next in town, as it's always a joy to see you around here when you're able to be. And listeners, thank you for the time today. We look forward to having you back next time.
You've been listening to Doxalogic, a podcast by Doxa Church in Rocklin, California. To learn more, visit us online at doxa.church.